The room was already dim when the photographer lit the final lamp, its flame trembling as if uncertain about what it was meant to reveal. Chemical trays sat like shallow graves on the counter, their sharp smell clinging to the velvet curtains that swallowed sound. Outside, rain tapped the windows in patient rhythm, and somewhere below a carriage passed, wheels scraping stone with the tired certainty of routine. Inside that narrow studio, time moved differently. It always did. The clock on the wall ticked without mercy, each second landing like a soft verdict. This was how most truths began in 1908. Quiet, unannounced, half hidden by habit, the bride stood exactly where she had been placed. Her spine was straight, her chin lifted just enough to suggest confidence without invitation. Lace pressed tightly against her throat, stiff and white, as if designed to hold words back. Her dress pooled at her feet, flawless, heavy with expectation. She had practiced this stillness for years, learning when to smile and when not to move at all. The groom stood beside her, polished shoes aligned with the edge of the rug. His hand rested at her waist, firm, possessive, a gesture rehearsed as carefully as any vow. He looked toward the lens with the calm assurance of a man whose future had already been arranged. They were a picture of order, of respectability, of everything the city approved. Behind them, mounted neatly on the wall, was a tall pane of glass. Decorative, ornamental, the sort of thing no one ever noticed twice. It caught the lamplight softly, reflecting a pale version of the room back onto itself. To anyone else it would have been nothing more than background, a detail, something meant to fill space without meaning. But glass has a way of doing more than reflecting. It remembers angles, it keeps impressions, it holds what passes too close for too long. The photographer counted softly, his voice barely audible over the ticking clock. Couple did not blink, the shutter opened. The moment was taken. In less than a breath it was over. Chairs scraped quietly as the bride relaxed her shoulders. The groom adjusted his cuff. Polite words were exchanged. Payment was made in folded bills pressed into a waiting hand. Names were written into the studio ledger, each letter formed carefully, deliberately, as if ink could lock certainty into place. Date, time, client, everything recorded, everything complete. The couple left without looking back. Outside, bells from the nearby church rang out bright and hollow, echoing down wet streets with practiced indifference. They rang for countless weddings, for countless unions that looked just like this one. Carriage wheels rolled away, carrying silk and ambition toward a future already decided. Inside the studio, the door closed and the room exhaled. The photographer moved to the darkroom with the plate held carefully between his fingers. He had done this thousands of times. He knew the process by heart. The tray. The solution, the weight. He lowered the plate into the liquid and watched the image begin to surface, faint at first, then sharper, lines and shadows finding their places. The bride's face appeared, calm, composed. The groom's figure followed, solid and cert. Everything exactly as expected, perfect, proper. Then something shifted. It was not sudden. It did not leap forward like a mistake. It emerged slowly, the way unwanted thoughts do, slipping in between what the eye expects to see. In the glass behind them, a distortion formed. At first the photographer thought it was a flaw in the plate, a smudge, a chemical imbalance. He leaned closer, breath held, lamp raised slightly. The shape did not disappear, it refined itself. A face, blurred but unmistakable, eyes open, mouth unsmiling, not stretched or warped like a trick of light, but present, deliberate. The face hovered in the reflection, positioned behind the bride, closer than the room's depth should have allowed. Too near, too intimate. It did not belong to the geometry of the studio. It did not follow the rules. The photographer straightened slowly. He checked the glass in the room. Empty, clean, no one standing there. He looked back at the plate. The face remained. It did not look startled. It did not look accidental. It looked as though it had been waiting. No one else saw it. No one else was meant to. The ledger lay open on the desk, ink drying, names fixed in place. There was no column for reflections. No space for uncertainty. He considered calling someone back, considered many things. Instead, he said nothing. Silence was easier. Silence always fit better into records. He rinsed the plate and set it aside with the others, filed it where it belonged, closed the case without comment. The studio returned to its quiet order. Lamps were dimmed, curtains drawn. The clock continued its work. Outside, the rain eased, leaving the street slick and reflective, a mirror of its own. That night, sleep did not come easily. When it did, it brought with it the unease of unfinished thoughts. The photographer dreamed of mirrors lining long corridors, each one holding eyes that followed him as he passed. Faces that did not speak, faces that did not accuse, just watched. He woke before dawn with the taste of chemicals still in his mouth and the sense that something had been recorded that could not be erased. The city beyond the studio moved on as it always did. Morning brought the sound of footsteps and factory whistles. Servants hurried through narrow streets, heads down, learning again how to be unseen. In homes like the one the bride now occupied, routines resumed. Breakfast trays, polished silver, quiet instructions delivered without eye contact. Class lines remained firm and unquestioned. Some lives were designed to be noticed, others were trained to disappear. Photographs meanwhile waited, they always did, stored in boxes, hung on walls. Passed down through hands that never asked too much of them. This one would be admired for its balance, its elegance. The way the bride's lace caught the light, the way the groom stood so assured. The glass would be ignored, the face within it overlooked, dismissed as shadow or flaw if it was noticed at all. But time has a way of returning to what was set aside. Glass does not forget what stood before it. It holds on quietly, without judgment, without urgency. Years would pass, decades. The city would change its shape, but not its habits. Buildings would rise and fall. Names would be remembered and repeated while others faded into absence. Yet the photograph would remain, patient, carrying a question no one had yet dared to ask. Who stood there just out of sight? Who leaned close enough to be caught by reflection but not by record? In a world where reputations were guarded like inheritance and silence was mistaken for order, the image waited. And so did the truth, pressed flat between glass and time, waiting for someone to finally look back and wonder who was meant to remain unseen. The house they returned to after the ceremony stood narrow and tall, its brick face darkened by years of rain and restraint. It had been built to impress from the outside and to control from within. The front door closed with a sound that suggested finality, as if once crossed, nothing inside was meant to escape. Curtains were drawn at precise hours. Lamps were lit and extinguished according to habit, not need. The house did not welcome people, it absorbed them. Upstairs, doors were heavy and kept shut, holding expectations behind polished wood. Downstairs, floors creaked softly under careful steps, and every footfall learned when to quiet itself. The bride had known this house since childhood. She had learned its rules before she learned its rooms. She knew where voices could rise and where they must fall. She knew which glances carried meaning and which were meant to pass unnoticed. Servants had surrounded her all her life, moving through her days like shadows shaped into usefulness. They knew her moods, her silences, the warning signs in the set of her jaw or the tightening of her fingers. They knew when to step forward and when to disappear. They knew more about her than the man she had married that morning, yet they were trained never to speak first. Knowledge in that house did not grant permission. Among them was a young woman whose work kept her close to surfaces that reflected but never spoke. She was assigned to mirrors and glass. Tall panes in hallways, small framed pieces above washstands, cabinet doors that caught faces briefly before giving them back altered and pale. Her cloth moved in slow circles, removing fingerprints, breath, the faint traces of human presence. She polished until nothing personal remained. That was the point, to erase the evidence of touch. She worked silently, eyes lowered, listening more than she ever looked. Words fell carelessly in hallways when those who spoke believed themselves alone. Engagements arranged not for affection but for advantage. Letters folded and unfolded with decision, then burned before sunrise so their contents would never linger. A pregnancy discussed only an implication, never named, never acknowledged directly. Silence wrapped around it like fabric. The young woman absorbed it all, storing detail she had no place to release. Her face remained blank, her hands steady. Invisibility was not a trait she possessed. It was a skill she was forced to learn. Power in that house did not shout. It did not need to. It breathed quietly through omission, through what was not said, through what was agreed to without discussion. Orders were given softly, often as suggestions, leaving room for obedience to feel voluntary. Mistakes were corrected without witnesses. The hierarchy was clear even when unspoken. Upstairs decided, downstairs adjusted, responsibility moved upward, guilt settled downward. That was how balance was maintained. When the wedding approached, preparations filled the house with movement that did not include everyone equally. Servants were instructed to remain out of sight during key moments. Certain hallways were closed to them, certain rooms forbidden. They learned to step back into door frames to become part of the architecture. The young woman obeyed as she always had. She polished the glass more carefully than ever, aware that reflections had a way of revealing what walls could not hide. On the morning of the ceremony, she passed the bride in a hallway and caught her reflection briefly in the mirror she had just cleaned. The bride did not look at her. She looked at herself, adjusted a strand of hair, straightened her shoulders. For a moment their eyes met through the glass. It was brief, too brief to name. But it lingered longer than it should have. After the wedding, the house returned to its routines with renewed precision. The groom's presence altered schedules, but not the structure. He moved through rooms with authority already granted, his influence settling easily into the space. He spoke with assurance, knowing which conversations would never be repeated beyond certain walls. His reputation followed him like a shield. The bride learned a new stillness, a composure sharpened by necessity. She fulfilled her role flawlessly, hosted, smiled, preserved the illusion. The young woman continued her work, polishing, listening, watching reflections rather than faces. She noticed how mirrors seemed unsettled, how certain angles caught movement that should not have been there, how her own reflection sometimes appeared doubled as if someone stood just behind her. She told no one. There was no language for such things, no permission to question. Questions did arise quietly, as they always did. A missing meal tray, a delay in assigned duties, a door found unlocked. Each time explanations were offered that dissolved into decorum, a misunderstanding, a reassignment, efficiency. The groom's influence smoothed concerns before they could take shape. The bride's calm reinforced the appearance of order. Rumors never crossed the threshold of respectability. They were stopped at the door like unwanted visitors. When the young woman's name disappeared from the household ledger, it was done neatly. One line replaced by another. Ink pressed firmly as if certainty could be enforced through penmanship. No note of illness, no mention of departure, no space left blank. Her absence was recorded as efficiency. The household adjusted, tasks redistributed, silence absorbed the gap. There was no mourning, no inquiry. The house had learned long ago how to continue without looking back, yet the mirrors remained restless. Reflections lingered where they should not, a shape at the edge of vision. A shadow that held too long. The bride began to avoid certain rooms, certain angles. She sensed accusation in her own image, though no one spoke it aloud. She caught herself turning mirrors away from walls, covering them with cloth under the guise of redecorating. She slept with doors closed and lamps lit. Still the sense followed her, the feeling of being seen by something that did not forget. Silence became a collaborator. It protected those who benefited from it. It isolated those who suffered under it. The house learned how easily a life could be folded into routine, how quickly absence could be normalized. Injustice, when unchallenged, does not announce itself. It settles, it waits, it becomes part of the structure, as unremarkable as brick and beam. Downstairs, new servants arrived. They learned the same lessons. Lower your eyes, keep your voice soft, do not ask questions that lead nowhere. Upstairs, the marriage was admired. The couple's name appeared in society pages. Photographs were displayed. The glass in the wedding portrait continued to hold its reflection, unseen by most, ignored by many. Time moved forward, seasons passed. The house aged quietly, absorbing more years of controlled order, yet something in it remained unsettled. Mirrors caught more than faces. They held memory. They held what had been erased too carefully to vanish entirely. And in that house, built on routine and silence, the absence of one young woman pressed against the walls like a held breath, waiting for the moment when someone would finally ask what had been lost, and why the reflection still refused to rest. Years later, the house belonged to someone else. Its address remained the same, but its purpose had shifted, as buildings often do when the people who shaped them are gone. The heavy door still closed with the same sound, though now it echoed through rooms rearranged for usefulness rather than status. Dust settled where portraits once hung. Sunlight reached corners it had never been allowed to touch. The wedding portrait had been taken down long before, wrapped in brown paper and placed in a wooden box with other remnants of a life no longer claimed. It rested there for decades, waiting without intention, the way objects do when time is done asking their permission. The conservator encountered it by accident. She was tasked with sorting what could be saved and what should be discarded, a quiet job meant to impose order on the leftovers of other people's certainty. Her worktable was narrow, her lamp steady. She lifted frames, unwrapped fabric, brushed away dust with motions learned through repetition. When she set the wedding portrait upright, she paused, not because it was beautiful, not because it was damaged, because something about it resisted the casual glance. At first she thought it was the glass. Old glass behaves differently. It ripples, it bends light in ways modern eyes are not trained to expect, but this was not distortion. The reflection behind the couple did not behave like light. It did not scatter. It did not blur as it should have. It held weight, depth. It pressed forward subtly like a thought that refuses to stay in the past. The conservator leaned closer, adjusted the lamp, changed the angle. The face did not vanish. It adjusted with her, maintaining its place as if aware of being seen. She did not speak. She rarely did while working. Silence allowed details to surface without interruption. She noted the height of the reflected face in relation to the bride, the closeness, the way the eyes seemed directed not at the camera but slightly aside toward something just beyond it. She had seen hundreds of photographs, thousands perhaps. This was not a trick of chemistry. It was not an accident of exposure. It was something preserved. She made a note and set the frame aside, intending to return to it after finishing the rest. That was how discoveries often began, not with urgency, with restraint. When she returned to the portrait later that afternoon, it felt heavier in her hands, though it weighed no more than before. The room was quiet. Dust floated in the light like slow snowfall. She removed the backing carefully, checking for notes, dates, anything that might explain what she was seeing. There was nothing. Only the image, patient and uncorrected. The letters appeared a week later. They were found during the cataloging of a secretary desk that had been sealed for years. Its drawers resisted opening, wood swollen by time and neglect. One compartment refused entirely until pressure in the right place revealed a false back. Behind it lay a small stack of papers, folded too many times, edges brittle. The conservator recognized them immediately for what they were. Not official correspondence. Not contracts or receipts. These were personal, unprotected, unimportant to those who had hidden them, and therefore dangerous. The paper was cheap. Thin, ink had bled through in places, creating shadows of words on the opposite side. The handwriting was unsteady but careful, as if the writer had learned to control her hand under instruction. Each letter began without greeting. There was no name addressed, no assurance of safety. They moved directly to what could not be said aloud. Promises made in whispers. Meetings arranged through glances rather than invitations. A private ceremony suggested, then postponed, then quietly abandoned. A child mentioned only once, folded into a sentence as if to minimize its presence. The words carried restraint, not passion. They were not written to persuade. They were written to record, to leave proof that something had existed, even if it was never acknowledged. One letter ended abruptly. The final line cut off mid-word, the pen lifted or taken away before the thought could be finished. The page showed a faint smear where the ink had been dragged, as if the paper had shifted suddenly. Another letter was dated weeks after the wedding. Its tone was different, less hopeful, more precise. It did not ask for love, it asked for recognition, for the child to be named, for the truth to be allowed, even quietly. The conservator felt the absence in those lines more than any accusation. The writer knew what she was asking would not be granted. Still she asked. There were no replies, no responses preserved, only the unanswered reaching of ink toward someone who had already decided to remain silent. The conservator read the letters twice, then set them beside the photograph. She did not need instruction to do this. The alignment came naturally, as if the objects themselves had been waiting to meet. She studied the face in the glass again, now with the letters in mind. The angle matched. The height matched. The eyes. She compared proportions, careful not to force connection where none existed. But the connection held without effort. The glass had not created a ghost. It had preserved a witness. This understanding did not arrive with drama. There was no moment of shock, no sharp intake of breath. It unfolded slowly like dust, becoming visible only when the light shifted. Once seen, it could not be unseen. The photograph was no longer an image of a wedding. It was a record of proximity, of presence denied elsewhere. The bride's role emerged differently under this light. Long deceased, preserved only in posed stillness, she appeared now not as an unaware participant but as a deliberate one. The reflection stood too close for ignorance. The letters suggested knowledge passed through corridors and glances. The bride had known. Her silence was not the absence of understanding. It was calculation, a decision made to protect structure over truth. The groom's reputation had endured for decades without interruption. His name appeared in ledgers and announcements, clean and unbroken. The house bore no marks of scandal. No official record spoke of loss. Power had done its work well, yet here in the fragile overlap of chemistry and truth, the underdog reclaimed form, not through accusation, not through voice, through presence. The conservator documented everything carefully. She photographed the photograph, scanned the letters, measured angles. Not because she intended to expose anyone. That word implies intention. She was preserving. That was her role. Preservation does not judge. It does not forgive. It simply refuses to erase further. As she worked, she felt the weight of delayed recognition. The knowledge that this truth had waited not because it was weak, but because the world had not been ready to see it. She imagined the writer of the letters pressing pen to paper with no guarantee of being read. She imagined the moment when the photograph was taken, the reflection forming without consent or intention, light obeying laws that cared nothing for hierarchy. When the conservator placed the photograph back into its frame, she did not clean the glass. She left it as it was, knowing that clarity was not always the goal. Some truths required their distortions, required viewers to lean closer to question what they thought they were seeing. The revelation did not change the past. It could not. The child mentioned in the letters left no trace beyond implication. The servant's name appeared nowhere else. The house stood, altered but intact. The wedding portrait remained composed, yet something fundamental had shifted. The image no longer asked to be admired, it asked to be understood. The conservator closed the box gently, as one might close a case file that has waited too long for review. She knew that discovery did not guarantee justice. Often it only guaranteed memory. But memory had its own weight, its own persistence. It moved differently through time, pressing forward when allowed. As she turned off the lamp and left the room, the reflection remained, held in glass and paper and careful documentation. The truth had not arrived loudly. It had not demanded belief. It had simply aligned itself, waiting for someone to notice that perfection was not the same as honesty, and that once honesty is seen, silence becomes much harder to maintain. The wedding portrait now hangs in a place where no one celebrates. It rests on a neutral wall, framed plainly, lit by an even light that refuses drama. People stop in front of it without knowing why. They do not smile. They lean closer. Something in the image resists the quick glance. The balance feels wrong, not broken but unsettled, like a room where furniture has been moved and the body still remembers where things used to be. The house itself has changed roles. Its rooms are now offices, its hallways widened by modern habits, its doors lighter than they once were. There are no commands echoing down the stairs, no bells summoning unseen hands. The floors still creak, but now they do so beneath purposeful steps that belong to no hierarchy older than a workday. Yet something remains. It is not visible in the walls or the ceilings. It lingers in the way sound pauses in certain corners, in how light behaves near the old stairwell, in the instinct some visitors have to lower their voices without knowing why. The portrait is part of an exhibit meant to document the building's past. Dates, names, occupations, all restored with care. The bride is identified clearly, her lineage traced, her dress described in language that respects its craftsmanship. The groom is listed beside her, his public roles summarized in neutral tone. And beneath them, added long after the photograph was taken, is another name. Written fully, carefully, without abbreviation, without apology in the handwriting. The servant's name recovered from letters and ledgers and fragments that survived by accident more than design. No restitution can reach her. No apology can cross a century. There is no living witness left to hear the truth spoken aloud. The recognition comes too late to change what mattered most, yet it changes something else. It alters the weight of memory. The story no longer rests entirely on polished surfaces. It now includes the pressure beneath them. Visitors read the placard and look back at the glass. Some see the face immediately, others only sense it, a closeness that does not belong to the composition, a presence pressed into the background that refuses to remain background. The glass, once ornamental, now stands as witness. It does not glow, it does not darken, it simply holds. The bride is no longer remembered only for elegance. Her stillness carries context now, her posture reads differently. The tight lace at her throat no longer signals fashion alone but restraint. Silence chosen, silence maintained. Her composure, once admired without question, is now understood as part of a larger structure, not cruelty, calculation. A decision made within limits she accepted and enforced. The groom's legacy shifts more subtly. His name still appears in records of influence and accomplishment. His achievements remain intact, but there is a footnote now, a quiet absence attached to his certainty, a reminder that reputations often survive by narrowing the story they tell. What he refused to acknowledge has become part of how he is remembered, not as scandal, as omission. History does not always speak through voices. Sometimes it reflects, sometimes it waits for the right light. The photograph waited decades for someone trained to look without expectation. The letters waited longer, hidden not by locks but by disinterest. The truth did not demand attention. It accepted delay. In the offices that now fill the house, people work without knowing the full weight of the ground beneath them. They drink coffee where silence once disciplined movement. They laugh where orders were once whispered. At times, someone will pause near the old staircase, distracted by nothing in particular. They will feel watched briefly, or remembered. The feeling passes. Most do not question it. The injustice was never corrected in its time. The servant did not receive protection. The child was not named. The silence held. Exposure arrives too late to be called justice in any complete sense. Yet exposure carries its own quiet force. It interrupts the lie of completeness. It refuses the comfort of forgetting. The face in the glass does not accuse. It does not demand sorrow. It does not reach forward. It endures. It reminds. It occupies space that was once denied. In doing so, it alters the shape of the room around it. Archives now include what they once excluded. Scholars reference the letters with care, not to dramatize but to acknowledge. The servant's name appears in indexes where it never belonged before. Students read it and move on, unaware that even this small act would have been impossible once. The truth settles into the record, not loudly but firmly. There is no final scene where balance is restored. No moment where wrongs are undone. The house still stands. The photograph still shows a wedding. The glass still reflects. What has changed is the silence. It feels heavier now, more deliberate, as if it knows it has been broken and can never fully return. Some truths do not heal. They clarify. They draw lines where blur once protected comfort. They allow the past to be seen without polish. That is their work. The portrait remains, patient as it has always been. People come and go. Light shifts across the glass. At certain hours, the reflection deepens and the face becomes easier to see. At other times, it retreats, leaving only the sense that something remains just beneath the surface. Some names only find peace when the truth is told.